Hello everyone and welcome back to Cottage Remedies. My name's Emily and today I'm here with Frank, and Frank also goes by the name Frank the Salt Guy or an ounce of salt a day. So how are you?
I'm very well, thanks Emily. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. So today Frank's going to be talking about everything to do with salt and basically about why it is actually very important for humans and to be in our diet. So, Frank, would you like to begin by introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm actually the long story is my parents immigrated to Australia a long time ago. I'm a tin pan pop, and I was educated in Australia. I read physics, nuclear physics at Melbourne University. Then I read mining engineering. And then I went off to the world of BHP and numerous things. I've worked in various mining ventures around Australia, and I did an MBA, as everybody does, and I've held some very senior positions in mining in my time on the plane. Yep. And I have one of those roles was working in the salt industry, first as the engineering and technical manager with Australia's largest domestic salt supplier, a company called Sodium Salt, that makes all the sacks of salt products. And then I ended up as the sales and marketing manager for that company before moving back into the mining field. I've done plenty of things along the way. And really, it was during my time in selling salt for Cheatham that I came across the idea that salt's probably pretty important.
Yeah. All right. So that's a bit about your background. And so you said now you're in the salt industry. So you've discovered that salt's quite important. And how did you go from engineering to the salt industry?
Okay. So as I said, I'm a mining engineer.
Yeah.
And the way that I got in Australia, the salt business is run as mines. So they actually have low-lying areas of land, and they pump seawater into those low-lying areas, and using solar evaporation, they are able to economically produce salt.
Right.
From solar evaporation. And Australia is one of the few countries in the world that does that. And most salt that people have in their diet actually is mined from underground deposits.
Oh, okay.
So in England, the USA, Europe, Russia, etc., Poland in particular, salt is mined from very large, huge deposits of what's called halite underground.
So that's rock salt?
It's rock salt.
Yeah.
And in Australia, solar evaporation has been the way that salt has been produced. And so, for all intents and purposes, all salt sold in Australia or manufactured in Australia is sea salt, which is unusual, believe it or not. So Australia is very fortunate from that point of view, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay. Because rock salt's inferior to sea salt?
It's to produce table salt from rock salt. The process is that they drill a hole down to the rock salt or mine it and dissolve it in water, and then when they bring it to the surface, they then remove things that are not salt, like magnesium and calcium from the salt by treating with caustic soda and soda ash.
Okay.
A pretty gruesome liquid.
Yeah.
And then that salt is crystallized using a system called vacuum-assisted pressure drying. So what that is, they're basically enormous vessels where they have a vacuum at the surface, and then that lowers the temperature at which the water boils, and the salt is produced from that. And then the reason that they remove the calcium and magnesium from that brew is because if they don't do that, these elaborate machines that produce salt that way, they gum up, they get clogged. So basically table salt in Europe, England, North America, most of Asia is actually produced that way. And the salt has a slightly bitter taste because it has one of the end products is a thing called Glauber salt, which is sodium disulfate, and then they have to add anti-cake agent to make the salt flow.
Okay, interesting. So do you want to explain then why salt is absolutely crucial?
Yeah, well, I assume that God made it that way, so I'll just go with that. I should point out so the disclaimers here obviously is I'm not medically trained, I'm an engineer. And I should also advise people that I still work in the salt industry, and as a result of having retired from mining, I started up a little hobby business myself. So I am still in the salt game, and I have a business which produces salt flakes. So, listeners should be aware of that.
Yeah.
Because, in the end, I'm what the Chinese call the yin fanza. And in China, it's like being a used car salesman to be a salt peddler. It was a part of the history of China.
Oh, right.
There were guys that would peddle not good salt at one stage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, your body, effectively, the liquid in it, all has salt at 8 grams, effectively salt at 8 grams a litre. And that concentration of salt in your body is the most closely controlled process in your body. So you have the concentration of sodium in your bloodstream, and in every mammal's bloodstream is 140 millimoles of sodium per litre, plus or minus 5. So it's between 135 millimoles and 145 millimoles. So what that means is, no matter how much salt I have or how little salt you have, the concentration of sodium in our blood will be the same.
Yeah.
And so important is sodium in the functioning of your bodily processes that your body goes to enormous effort to maintain that concentration at the right level. So what that means is if you cut down your salt, then your body will drop down water and you'll become dehydrated.
Yeah.
If you have less salt available, then your body says, I haven't got much salt. I'll have to get rid of the water.
Yeah.
To keep the concentration at the right level. And then it says, that's not enough. I've got to do more. I've got to hold on to salt. So the kidneys and liver then activated on what's called the renin-angiotensin system, where your liver and kidney start producing hormones which will cause sodium to be retained in the body, and the kidney hangs onto it, and that puts your kidneys under tremendous pressure. Right? It really causes a problem. So when someone has a low salt diet, they're effectively going to become dehydrated, and their body is going to be reducing a substance called renin in the blood, and it thickens the blood. So ultimately, you will get high blood pressure, and the problems of not having enough water in your body are myriad, and it's just been well known for a long period of time. People are now chronically dehydrated, but no one explains why you're chronically dehydrated. Now imagine that someone who's been on a low salt diet suddenly says, I'm dehydrated. What should I do? I'll drink water. But of course, drinking water without salt, that water is effectively poison to that person because it cannot be absorbed. It can't rehydrate you without having salt with it. And then what they call the isotonic level of salt required for that is 8 grams of salt per litre. So it turns out then, of course, that the most common invasive surgical procedure in the medical world is the insertion of a saline drip.
Yeah.
So nurses will tell you that salt is bad for you. Doctors tell you that salt is bad for you. But what's the first thing that happens to the vast majority of patients when they go to hospital?
The saline drip.
We know that they're unwell. The doctors know they're unwell. So they put a saline drip in because it always works. Probably the smartest thing that can happen to anyone that goes to hospital is to get the saline drip inserted. And in my opinion, you may as well just not do anything else but put saline drip in. My wife had an operation a few years ago. And during that time, she was given 6 litres of saline in the space of 24 hours. So that means she got effectively 50 grams of salt in the space of a day, which is nearly 2 ounces of salt. And of course, the doctors and nurses are feeding her the food she got. Guess what?
The low sodium foods.
It had no salt in it.
Yeah. And they're probably wondering, how has she not had a heart attack at 50 grams of salt so far?
You know, this is the absurdity that goes on. And this is what I call cognitive dissonance in the medical world, particularly with nurses, when they're inserting saline drips all the time. And I've got many friends that are nurses, and I'll say this to them, and they say, oh, well, maybe we should stop inserting the saline drips.
Oh, gosh. But if the saline drips are working.
And there's some crazy stuff going on with this, because at one stage, the Royal Melbourne's Hospital, the Children's Hospital, did a test where they, instead of inserting what we call an isotonic solution of 8 grams, they inserted liquid at 4 grams per litre, and it actually killed some of the children.
Okay, because it was, too little. So because it has to be the exact amount, as you said. Yeah.
If you inject water into your veins, you will kill someone. If you don't insert the isotonic level if you inject, it has to be isotonic saline.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's slightly higher. I think it goes into about 9 grams. And because it's slightly higher, where the drip goes in, it causes damage locally to the vein. But it's, I think they choose to do that because going a bit low is more dangerous than going a bit high. Now, it turns out, just as by way of digression, that the first saline drips were actually seawater, diluted to the same level as, your body. So it's about a third. Yeah. So you would dilute it by, what would you do? 2 parts of water, of sterile water, to 1 part of seawater would get you an isotonic solution. And that has to be filtered to remove particles that are larger than 10 microns, which is the same that happens in a saline solution. And those injections were the first blood replacement therapies. And that therapy in some cases is still going on.
Where they're putting ocean water.
Yeah. And people can Google that. A lot of it's happening in South America. So there are various practitioners that do that. And it's my view, I don't know if you know the legend of there's a substance called amritha, which is the elixir of eternal life.
No, I'm not sure.
Vedic medicine.
I'm not sure.
The story of how it gets created is that the good gin and the bad gin cooperated for the first and only time to shake the world and release something from the rocks into the ocean to create amritha. And it's my view that seawater is in fact amritha, the secret to long life.
Wow. There you go. It's interesting.
Now, if anyone decides, so I drink seawater every now and then, but if you drink it, you really have to either drink it while you're there at the ocean, and you can have a mouthful, just a sip every 20 minutes. Or if you take it home and do it, you'll have to boil it because obviously seawater is alive, and if you take it, try and store it for any period of time, it goes off. So you would have to boil it and filter it.
Okay. And you got those from, because it was Elaine Bombard, right? that
Alain
wrote about
Bernard
that.
was a French doctor that set out to prove that the ancient voyagers could travel without fresh water. Now, very interesting, in the wiki article that I sent you, that's been changed from the wiki article of 5 or 6 years ago, because they, in the Wikipedia article that I sent to you, some doubt had been cast about whether this guy ever actually did these. If you read the article that I sent you, there was some doubt saying, "Oh, did he really do that, or did he have some water with him?" But,
right.
The thing is so small.
Yeah.
How could he have?
Yeah.
And it turns out that both the French and the Taiwanese navies train their sailors with this technique. And the longest, I think they've gone to about 130 plus days just sipping seawater. So the idea that you will die from sipping seawater is
not true.
Has been falsified by that work, and yet you will still hear people saying if you drink seawater, it's toxic.
Yeah. And you just, even when you go,
in one city, you'll be on the toilet for a day, without a doubt. But you can sip a mouthful of water every 20 minutes. So if you ever decide to go sailing around the Whitsunday Islands and get wrecked by a hurricane, Emily, don't die.
Just drink seawater.
Just have a sip every 20 minutes, and you'll be fine.
And when you're even just in the ocean and you get washed in a wave, for example, you just swallow water and it's nothing. It's fine. It's not like the ocean water is poisonous like they claim.
It's just crazy, isn't it? The things that get put out there. And yet, mammals, whales, dolphins, seals, all sorts of, seabirds, all sorts of animals. They thrive in the ocean. Fish thrive in the ocean. All of this idea that somehow the ocean can be bad for you or contain microplastics or just, there's so much nonsense that goes on. The ocean is teeming with life. Mm-hmm. Just teeming. Yeah. So that's just a little aside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are the other functions? So salt is actually got two very important things in it. There's the sodium, but 60% by weight of salt is actually chloride. And it turns out that there has never, ever, ever been a study of what the optimum level of chloride is for a living man or woman. It's done in animals. It's done for everything except for living men and women.
And that's weird because they test it in blood tests, the level of chloride.
Zero chloride. It's 2023, and I first realised this in 2014. That you can't get any studies. The US Drug and Food Administration, their statement is simply that, well, we know everyone has enough salt, and salt's 60% chloride, so the consensus is everyone gets enough chloride. No study. It's 2023.
Wow.
That the optimum level of chloride required is unknown, not specified.
That says something.
Now, chloride is extraordinarily important. So chloride is the main catalyst for the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen in hemoglobin. It's a thing called the chloride shift, and the more free chloride you have in your body, the more efficient you will breathe, the more efficiently you will breathe. And my wife climbed to Mount Kilimanjaro 5 or 6 years ago, and she's a woman. She was in her late 50s, but she had plenty of salt in her diet, and she made it to the top. And very many fit people that eschewed salt couldn't get there. They could not get to the top of Kilimanjaro.
Wow.
In her walking group. And the porters that take everything up there, and you can imagine, so there, for 25 climbers, there were like 90 porters, so you can imagine what this caravan is like. And the porters are encouraging the climbers to have salty food on their way up the walk. Kilimanjaro.
Yeah, I mean, then you're replacing your electrolytes that you're losing on such a hike.
Yeah. And also because what I'm suggesting is it's the improvement in your respiration
And breathing, yeah.
that allows you to get to the top of the and it's very low partial pressures up at the top of Kilimanjaro.
Yeah.
It's at I think it's like 19,000 feet. It's a long mountain.
Wow. Yeah, that's really high.
and for my, late 50s wife to have got there years ago was very impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so salt has one very important. So the key aspect of salt is in what we call the acid base, maintaining the acid base balance in a living man or a woman, or any mammal for that matter. So it turns out topologically that we are a donut. We're equivalent to a donut in topography. By that I mean there is a hole between your mouth and your bum, all the way through your body. So you are like a donut.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
And so when you eat salt, when it gets more or less to the stomach, the salt, it's a very elaborate process, but the simple outcome is that the salt gets turned into sodium bicarbonate, which is taken inside your body, and hydrochloric acid, which stays outside your body but in your stomach. So the reason I talked about the donut is to try and get across to people that the inside of your stomach is outside your body.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
So it's a very important, when people talk about, I'm acid and I'm basic and, I need to be alkaline, it's very important to understand that you've got a hole all the way through your body. You are, as I said, like a donut. So what does that mean? So the salt gets converted into hydrochloric acid and sodium bicarbonate, largely as a result of actions going on inside your body, but it gets excreted at what's called the parietal cells that line your stomach. So at that point, your body squirts out hydrochloric acid for use in the gastric juices, and the sodium bicarbonate stays on the other side of basically your stomach and ends up being taken up into your body as sodium bicarbonate. Now, the sodium bicarbonate is what makes your body alkaline. And the alkalinity of your body is the second most closely maintained number, if you like. It's maintained between 7.35 pH and 7.45 pH.
Yeah.
Now, but in carbonate terms, in bicarbonate terms, it's quite a lot of difference. The difference in the amount of carbonate in your body at 7.35 is 40% of the level of carbonate in your body at 7.45. So that if you're on that slightly higher range of 7.4, you'll have more bicarbonate in there. And what does that mean? You've heard about the need to maintain your body as being alkaline. Well, in fact, your body is always alkaline.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost impossible to not be alkaline.
Especially since the blood, like you're saying, has to be a specific alkalinity.
Yeah, it's a specific pH, but that pH is maintained by the bicarbonate. Now, if you cut salt out of your diet, then your body is going to struggle to maintain that alkalinity because you're not going to be producing enough bicarbonate. So when people go to diets such as the GAP diet, or in my case, the keto diet,
mm-hmm.
if you don't have enough salt, you will experience acidosis.
Because it's low in carbohydrates, right?
It's low in carbohydrates, and there'll be things will start to alter in your body, especially if you've been on a high carbohydrate diet. When you make this change your body chemistry, and you're not taking enough salt,
Yeah.
bicarbonate level will fall, and your pH of your internal body, right, can fall below 7.35. That means and so it might still be alkaline, but it will be below 7.35.
Okay.
So if listeners can remember these two very important features about the importance of salt. The first one is that your body maintains to a very tight margin the concentration of sodium in your body fluids, particularly your blood, and it maintains within a very tight range the pH of your body.
Yeah.
Now, conversely, in your stomach, if you have more salt, you'll produce more acid. And the pH of your stomach acid will be stronger. It'll be, if you have enough salt, you should have a pH of 1 for your stomach acid, which is just super strong. And when you have stomach acid, gastric fluids at that strength, it can just break down any protein, anything that's going in there. Quite astonishing. So anything you take in, if you have enough salt, your stomach will be able to digest that and prepare it for its trip down the rest of your intestine. It's been properly prepared for that purpose. So that's what I talk about when I call it the acid-base balance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the stuff that I'm saying was just commonly taught in medical schools, basically up until about World War II, and that kind of disappeared.
Yeah, that's right.
And it turns out that you produce 3 litres of gastric fluid a day. Now, if most people would be lucky to have gastric fluid of a pH of 3 or 4, so it's, although you think it's strong, it's actually quite weak. And what happens then is that when they eat food, because the gastric fluid isn't acid enough, the food will be retained in the stomach for too long, and it causes a build-up in the stomach, and it pops the mitral valve at the top of your stomach open, and the acid gets into your esophagus. And that's what causes heartburn.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the crazy thing is that the common treatment for heartburn is to treat you with an antacid. And that's the worst possible thing, because that's making your stomach acid even weaker, and it's going to cause that problem. That's why people that take antacid medication never cure themselves of indigestion. One of the cures for indigestion, or what they call it GERD now, I think, is to take betaine hydrochloric capsules. And I'm not a doctor, and I'm not recommending you do this, but people should consider increasing the salt in their diet instead.
Yeah.
But please consult your doctor.
Yeah.
But essentially, if you have indigestion, it's not because you have too much acid, it's because you have too little. Or the strength of your acid is too low. Does that make sense to you?
No, yeah, it does. So the more salt that you consume, the lower the pH of your stomach acid, the less symptoms of indigestion you'll have, and the better you'll digest your food. And there's so many symptoms that come from not being able to digest your food properly. If your stomach acid's too weak, like constipation or bloating, like you said, because the food sits in your stomach for too long. Or even if you feel like after you eat a meal and you feel like food's sitting really heavy in your stomach, that's just a sign that your stomach pH is likely too high.
Now, going back to the internal pH of the body, as I said, so we're talking about the stomach being outside the body and the bicarbonate being on the inside of the body. So between the wall of the esophagus and the intestine and your skin, that pH should be at 7.4. Now, it turns out that pH is the pH where bacteria, toxic bacteria, algae, parasites get killed off. They can't survive in that. And every swimming pool is maintained at a pH of 7.4 for that reason. Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't. That's interesting.
So
yeah.
So a swimming pool should be maintained at the same pH as mammalian fluid system.
Right, yeah. Okay.
For exactly the same reason.
But then what do they use for that in pools? Like chlorine or?
No, they just use chemicals.
Just chemicals, yeah.
Yeah. So what you do is you use acid and soda ash, the same things. Your body is basically a chemical factory. You produce hydrochloric acid, sodium bicarbonate, all of the things that are made in the chloralkali industry. And in fact, for whatever reason, I did this calculation once. It turns out that if you have, most people are producing about 10 grams of sodium bicarbonate a day. And it turns out that that's all of the people in all the world produce as much bicarbonate as the entire bicarbonate industry produces.
Really? Just by ourselves?
So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So that's the key reason why you need salt, is first of all to digest your food. And when you digest your food, then you get the minerals and the nutrients that you need to run your body.
Yeah.
So many people eat food, but because their digestion is so poor, they are starving themselves. They are nutrient deficient because they're putting stuff in their body that they cannot absorb. And then there's all sorts of other problems that flow on from that. And secondly, without sufficient salt, they're dehydrated and their pH can go off whack. They haven't got the level of bicarbonate available to their body to keep, the same things that affect swimming pool, the algae, all the things that can cause you harm or toxins in your body. Without the right pH, they will proliferate.
Yeah. And if you have, low sodium or low chloride in your body, what is it that sodium and chloride do in our body that is so necessary beyond do you want to speak more about that?
Look, I understand that it's mostly about the nerve transfers and so the way that energy is exchanged in your body is they say by a proton exchange between sodium and potassium.
Yeah.
Now, whether I believe all that stuff anymore, I don't know, but that's the claim. So that your blood cells are rich in potassium and the fluids surrounding the blood cells are rich in sodium, and that drives energy across the barrier. There's an exchange of energy between sodium and potassium. It's mitigated by mitochondria, and low salt levels also damage mitochondria. So you will maintain, and the mitochondria is the energy driving element in your body. That's where your energy is generated, at the mitochondrial level. So then your body is really geared about doing everything it can to maintain the salt level at this very exact level. And so it doesn't make any sense to starve yourself of this essential nutrient. And when you go to look on, say, the Victorian Health website and look up, how much salt should I have, the first thing it says is salt is an essential nutrient. And then it goes on to say, but don't have any. Now, I just find that kind of...
Yeah.
Okay, you're being told that it's essential. Now, it turns out, as I said, that the studies, and I'll post you a whole bunch of papers, but the longest longevity is associated with a salt intake of 15 grams a day.
Yeah, wow. And that's way beyond what they recommend.
Well, again, the problem is that when they give recommendations, they often say so many grams of sodium. And people conflate the sodium recommendation with the salt recommendation. So let's say they said 3 grams of sodium, or we'll say 2 grams of sodium. That's actually 5 grams of salt.
Mm-hmm.
6 grams of sodium is 15 grams of salt a day.
Right,
so when I say 15 grams, and that sounds like really high, it's actually 6,000 milligrams of sodium. It's not that It's not that crazy.
Yeah.
So there is also this thing where people constantly talk about sodium, not salt. And it annoys me because sodium is a metal that on contact with water will violently explode. No one in the world gets any sodium in their life. Very few people have even seen sodium. I've seen it. It's a dangerous metal that has to be handled very carefully. So constantly talking about sodium misleads people just by saying that.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I've heard people talk about how sodium is an explosive and that's one reason why we shouldn't consume it. But does that mean that that's not a problem when it's, in combination with chloride and it's salt?
Salt is the most inert compound. It's in the what would you call it, the world of the alchemist. It's the thing with one of the highest etheric indexes of all time. It's so stable. And you can dissolve it in water, boil the water off, and it comes back as salt. You can do all sorts of things, and it will, sodium chloride, table salt, will come back together again. The affinity between the sodium and the chloride is incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those magic substances. Mm-hmm. It's like water.
And that's true. And it's, it's been talked about a lot. It's written a lot about in, the biblical text and, also over 100 times. There you go. There's your fact.
The covenant between man and God was sealed with salt.
And then also salary comes from salt. And a lot of words like sal equals salt. So salvation. And it used to be currency.
Soldier, because the soldiers were paid with salt.
Yeah.
And up until the refrigeration, everybody had 15 grams of salt a day in their diet because, the way to preserve food was to salt it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there are other things that come out of low salt intake is that it turns out that your sodium is stored in your bones. So when you lower your salt intake, then your body says, oh, I've got this problem. I have to maintain the concentration of sodium in my blood at 140 millimoles. What am I going to do? I've got to get sodium from somewhere. And it will break down your bones to get them.
Mm-hmm.
To get it.
Yeah.
And so people that are fluctuating in their salt intake too wildly will end up with osteoporosis.
Yeah. And can that have an effect on teeth as well? Because teeth are like a bone.
Everything.
Yeah. Wow.
Everything.
That's very interesting because, I've heard some people who have, been on a low salt diet for even 20 years, but were on a supposedly very healthy diet. It wasn't like a standard American diet, but just had decaying teeth after that 20 years. So you never know. It could have been the low salt intake.
Well, so if we talk about the three longest lived groups of people in the world and the healthiest groups of people, there's the people of Japan in generally, but it's specifically Okinawa Island. There's the people of Sardinia in Italy, or near Italy, and Orange County in the USA. Now, those people have three quite different diets. The Okinawans have fish and quite a lot of vegetables and quite a lot of rice in their diet, even though, is not a fan of rice at all. And they, so those people are, they're incredibly active into their old age on Okinawa Island. But just in general, the Japanese people, there are 65,000 people over the age of 100 in Japan. And I think there are probably less than 40,000 people over the age of 100 in the USA. And the USA has more than 3 times the population of Japan. So it's a huge difference in longevity between Japan and you say when measured as centenarians. And the people of Sardinia, they have they're goat and sheep, so they have a diet rich on fish, a lot of goat, saturated fats, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And the people of Orange County, they're a kind of almost like a Seventh-day Adventist style diet.
Yeah.
So they're three quite different diets, but all of those people have very long lives. But in my view, the things that they have in common is that they have a strong spiritual practice, number one. Number two, they have plenty of sunshine.
Yeah.
Right? All of those people, if you look at their skins, they're people that go out and make sure they have plenty of sun exposure all day. These old people of Orange County with the tennis clubs and, all the crazy stuff, and I don't know if you've seen this thing. And they have a lot of salt in their diet.
Yeah. There you go. Those are the important things.
Commonalities of those three most long-lived groups. Because apparently it's all a big mystery about what it is that makes them live longer. But in my opinion, if you understand, everybody understands.
Yeah.
So the doctors all understand how salt plays a part in your life. You know how important sodium is to the bloodstream, how important it is to be well hydrated, but somehow, and that they use saline drips, but somehow salt is bad. None of the behaviour of the medical field in Australia makes any sense to me about salt.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just a mass of contradictory behaviours that is all I see. Just while I'm thinking about it, if some people are like me that like to drink wine and may go a bit heavy sometimes,
mm-hmm.
the hangover cure that always works without fail is to have salt, mineral water, and juice of half a lemon before you go to bed, and when you wake up, and you'll never experience hangover again. Headaches are the result of dehydration.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can swap screens, but what I'd like to do is talk about the very last Salt Institute meeting.
Yeah, sure.
It occurred in 2019, 2000. I didn't go there, but I had people that I'd worked with over many years had attended, and they fed me a lot of the information. And the reason they did that is because I had always been saying to them, and come back again, when we were working in this industry, that we were considered to be, cigarette salesmen, that we were, poisoning the world with our toxic salt and murdering millions of people. And I was constantly feeding back this information that I don't think that's right, because why are we selling thousands and thousands of tons of salt to the stock feed industry? They're mammals, aren't they? Or why are we getting different information about men and women than we are to agriculture?
Yeah.
One of the largest markets for salt in the world is animal lips and blocks and supplements. Cows, in Australia in particular, whenever there's a drought, the sales of salt blocks and salt licks would skyrocket because the cows, the ruminant animals cannot digest the dry grass without the salt. And people say, oh no, ruminant animals work on microbial, etc. That's partially true. When the feed is dry, they use acid the same as we do.
Mm-hmm.
So quite fascinating how that
turned
out. And when it rains,
sometimes we need it.
All of a sudden the salt sales plummet, and the guy that was a manager in the company used to ring me up and harass me and say, "What have you done? Why are stock feed sales down?" And I would just say it was raining, and he'd get all stroppy about it. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Disconnect between understanding the physical mechanisms that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really how I got into this idea about salt. And then I went selling salt in Japan. I'm watching people just have massive quantities of salt, and they're all living super long lives and having a merry old time. Thanks very much.
In Japan.
Just extraordinarily fit and healthy and strong. And more importantly, at any age group, say between 60 and 65 or 50 to 60 or something, Japanese people experience bone breakage at 1/5, 20% of the rate that people in the USA, England and Australia. 1/5.
And they also consume the most salt. Or consume a lot. Yeah.
Salt in Japan is just a very intensive part of their religion and their culture. But they are being encouraged now to drop their salt. And at the same time, we're seeing a rise in the number of bone breakages.
Okay.
So fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
But so what happened in this last meeting of the Salt Institute is that the people were getting very bolshy and started to talk about suing people for their terrible advice on salt. And a whole series of papers were produced at the Salt Institute, which got to the point where they were talking about suing various people over the advice that was going on. And the reason I got these papers is because these fellows that I'd worked with who knew my views on salt but hadn't agreed with it up until more or less the time of these papers coming out, sent me all these data. And I'm going to go through one of them with you here now because I think it's incredible.
Yeah, sure.
After this particular conference took place, within a few months, the Salt Institute was shut down because it was owned by the large salt companies. And the whole Salt Institute, after being in place for 150 years or more, was closed down within a very short time, completely dispersed. All its technical papers were lost. All the data was lost. Everything shut down. Incredible.
Yeah.
An incredible story. How do I share my screen with you?
Okay. That's a good question.
I think we have liftoff here, Emily.
Yeah, that worked. Good.
Okay, so I'm going to go through. This was a study on what's going on in old people's homes in the USA. And, I'll go through it. I think it's fairly self-explanatory.
Yeah, it looks great.
All I need to do is work out how to do that.
I think if you click that at the very top in the orange on the left. Yeah. That should present it.
Terrific. Okay. So this presentation was put together by a guy called Morton Satin, the Vice President of Science and Research at the Salt Institute. It's the effect of low salt diets and hyponatremia. Hyponatremia means you haven't got enough salt. Well, in fact, it means that the level of salt in your blood has fallen below the critical level of 135 millimoles. Most assisted living facilities for elderly people employ low salt diets. Long-term low salt diets can lead to asymptomatic hyponatremia. In other words, your level of sodium in your blood is below 135 millimoles, but you don't pick it up. Major dietitian associations and HHS support the Salt Institute stance against low salt diets. The Salt Institute program to promote regular, appetizing and tasty meals. Now, this is a letter here from Dr. Isaac Schlesser that ended up in one of the old people's homes, and he basically was writing just appalled at the effect that his time in this old people's home was having on his quality of life. And so he wrote, I believe as a Canadian cardiologist who for 65 years has examined and treated elderly patients, that falls and subsequent fractures would dramatically decrease if seniors were given regular diets in place of the current low-salt diet regime. After 4 or 5 months of living in the retirement residence on a low-salt diet, I gradually found that my appetite was diminished and I unknowingly became a case of chronic dehydration and hyponatremia. I beg your pardon, he's called it hyponatremia, which is a salt deficiency rather than a problem of the concentration. On the 23rd of January 2003, I fell and broke my hip. After it was repaired, the surgeon told me that I must use a walker. It was 6 months later when I fell again, holding the walker, and broke my left shoulder. From my practice, I realised that this deterioration in my physical state is not a normal progression of old age. Dehydration and hyponatremia produced all of these changes. Life is not possible without water or air, but a miserable existence can be had without salt. Spending your golden years in a retirement home with a low-salt diet will convert your last years to a long chronic illness. And that's a copy of the letter that Dr. Isaac Schlesser wrote.
Mm-hmm.
So, quick explanation of hyponatremia. Normal plasma levels between 136 and 145 millimole, as I spoke to you about before. 3 to 3.3 grams of sodium, which is about 8 grams of salt, as I spoke about before. Hyponatremia occurs when sodium drops below this. A mild asymptomatic form occurs when it's between 125 and 135. In other words, the concentration of sodium in your blood has fallen below that 3 grams per litre. Severe hyponatremia occurs when it's below that. Now, this is what I think is one of the most important bits of information for anyone to know, but certainly when you get to my age, and I'm approaching 65, the blood-brain barrier prevents the sodium exchange. Water crosses the blood-brain barrier. When you have acute hyponatremia on the brain, in other words, when your osmotic pressure is not correct, the blood-brain barrier will prevent sodium exchange, and it allows water to cross the blood-brain barrier and enters the brain cells to equivalent tonicity. The brain swells up against the limiting skull case, and emergency treatment is required to shrink the brain back to normal. Neurological damage and death is common. And there are some graphics there showing the difference. You can see that on a low salt diet, you can see that this change has occurred in the brain. Can you see that reasonably well?
Yeah, I was going to say that would be a really good image. It is a bit small, but
I'll send you the slide presentation.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
So the mortality rate of acute hyponatremia is 55%. The mortality rate of chronic asymptomatic hyponatremia is 12%.
Wow.
And symptomatic and chronic asymptomatic is, it's not that high, but it's still too low.
Yeah, 55% is high.
It's a form of starvation.
Yeah.
Asymptomatic hyponatremia is the inevitable accompaniment of a long periods on a low salt diet. Although this disease may seem capricious with regard to the speed of its onset and the symptoms of its presence, no one can avoid it who lives on a low salt diet for several months. We store the bulk of our sodium in the skin and the bone tissue, as I spoke about before, and that may act as a reservoir for some time, but it does not last forever. Despite what many believe, asymptomatic hyponatremia is not a disease someone catches, such as pneumonia or yellow fever or typhus. It comes about when an essential nutrient, he's saying sodium, and I'm going to say salt, ceases to be applied to the body in sufficient quantities. And this use of the word sodium is what I'm going to highlight to people over and over again. You need to think salt, not sodium. Sodium is an explosive metal, and the chances of it existing naturally is 0.
Yeah.
By nature, it is a form of essential nutrient starvation. Is there such a thing as asymptomatic hyponatremia? Mild or asymptomatic hyponatremia is not as evident as acute hyponatremia. Osmotic differences present a continuum, and abnormally low plasma sodium concentration will always cause water to enter the brain tissue to attempt osmotic equilibration. And it is the water that causes Alzheimer's disease. Symptoms may be more subtle and take longer to be evident than the acute form, but asymptomatic hyponatremia is not asymptomatic. Now, you're going to see some graphs here. If you look at these things, they are the walking patterns of someone as their brain deteriorates, as they get less and less sodium. You see they walk in a relatively straight path in the top one?
Yeah.
And by the time we're getting down here, the walking paths are erratic. If you can imagine that line is the path of someone walking from this side, where my cursor is now, in a straight line that way. So in this top effect here, it's sodium at the level of 139. So that's the normal. It's in the normal range, and that's the gait of an elderly person walking from where the hand of my cursor is now across this way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a slight deviation in their movement, right?
Yeah.
Going up and down. By the time they're down here at 124, a very low level, they basically just wobble all over the place.
Right.
So these squiggly lines are the paths of people walking from left to right on the screen.
Yep. So that's the symptoms of hyponatremia when they're walking goes out of balance.
So what
Yep.
happens is the water gets onto the brain, causes the swelling and damage, and people's faculties just diminish. You know, their ability to walk in a straight line is just severely disrupted.
Yeah, that's pretty severe.
So gait disturbance and decreased response time, mimicking effects of alcoholic excess, increased risk of bone fractures in ambulatory elderly patients for two reasons. One, because their balance is so poor, and two, because they've taken, their body has been robbing the sodium out of their bones and making their bones very weak. And the corollary of this is what's going on in Japan, where the elderly maintain very high salt level, and they have bone fractures at 1/5 of the rate that we do in any given population. 60 to 65, say. 1/5 of the rate.
Yeah.
Osteoporosis in elderly women with borderline hyponatremia. And down here, there is a series of, I don't know if you can see it down the bottom, but all the references are there. So people can look these papers up. They'll be able to find, for example, whom EJ et al. Mild hyponatremia is a risk factor for fractures, the Rotterdam study. Gankum Ping, etc. Mild hyponatremia, a risk factor for the ambulatory elderly. So there are paper after paper after paper being quoted here.
Yeah.
There's a graph of the gait of someone in the normal level. There's a graph of the gait of someone in the hyponatremic level. I mean, it's cruel. Absolutely cruel what's going on. So the assisted living nursing home stats, this is in the US, more than 2 million adults over the age of 65 living in assisted living and nursing facilities. 70% of elderly patients suffer 2.6 falls a year. It's awful, isn't it? Really?
Mm-hmm.
More than double the rate of falls which occur for elders living in the general community. So in other words, going to an assisted living or nursing home guarantees that you are going to have a low salt diet and basically just suffer horribly.
Yeah, that's right.
CDC estimates that more than 5% of elders 65 or older are assisted living residents, but these patients make up to 20% of deaths resulting from falls. 2,000 elderly patients die each year as a result of just from falling over. It's cruel.
Mm-hmm.
It's just straight out cruel. Is there a standard practice for diets in assisted living? Yes. One has been in place since 2011 and endorsed by the following organisations. And these are the people that have endorsed this diet. based on proper actual science and not the nonsense that goes on now. And what about government endorsement? New dining standards have been endorsed by the Centre for Clinical Standards and Quality Surveying and Certification Group. The dining standards for nursing home and assisted living are now fully in place, so there's just no reason why any nursing home is on these low-salt diets. Low-salt diets, for those that don't need them, may be medical malpractice, and that's where I talked about the people at this particular conference that went on for days were getting very, very bolshy. And next thing you know, the whole thing's been disbanded. What was the main comment of the largest dietary organisation? The American Dietetic Association, now the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, largest organisation of food and nutrition professionals, with over 100,000 credentialed practitioners, says the relationship between congestive heart failure, blood pressure and sodium intake in the elderly population has not been well studied. The American Heart Institute recommends that older adults attempt to control blood pressure through diet and lifestyle changes, and recommends a sodium intake of 2 to 3 grams a day. Now, I might say that when you see that sodium intake of 2 to 3 grams, you think that's how much salt you have.
Yeah, it's not
true. 2 grams is 5 grams a day. 3 grams is 8 grams a day for patients with congestive heart failure. However, a randomised trial of adults aged 55 to 83 found that the normal sodium diet improved congestive heart failure outcomes. A liberal approach to sodium diets may be needed to maintain adequate nutritional status, especially for frail older adults. This open rejection of establishment dogma is the direct result of close interaction of long communication and follow-up with the Salt Institute. And what's happened to the Salt Institute? Gone. They've even gone so bolshy as to say salt saves lives here. The Salt Institute is producing a brochure for nursing home managers and practitioners informing them of their new dining practices. And guess what happened before they could get to do that? This will be followed up by a lecture series to nursing home assisted living facilities associations to promote the new practices. The goal is to prevent the elderly from spending their golden years in a retirement home with a low-salt diet that will convert their last years into a long chronic illness. The elderly should save a life. In my opinion, this is one of the most important presentations I have ever seen.
I mean, yeah, it was quite shocking, really.
Yeah.
But
I'll send it to you, Emily.
I
hope that you can be willing to distribute it widely to anyone you can.
Yeah, of course. That would be really great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because who would have knew about that, really? It is not talked about. And everybody wonders what it is that, goes on in the elderly homes and why there's so many falls and at that age. And then yet they're on their low salt diets and they're...
Yeah. So, you ask me why this has happened. I only have a biblical reason.
Mm-hmm.
In my view that, there are a group of people in the world that simply don't like us. And they've managed to get in charge of the important areas where policy is controlled.
Yeah.
And, in my opinion, the simple way to combat this is through the sharing of knowledge. I mean,
absolutely.
The studies are all there. There are, on that presentation that I gave to you was, a swag of papers that can be looked up and examined. And it's no different to the advice, to have margarine instead of butter. It's beyond crazy.
Yeah, and it really makes no sense. And there's studies for everything in a way, and you got to wonder, some of them at least must be false to a certain extent when they're trying to prove that, these hydrogenated oils like margarine are better for you than saturated fat.
Yeah, it's just another example of, or even, the sunshine thing, stay out of the sun. People don't realise that Florence Nightingale became famous simply because she put recuperating soldiers out in the sun. In their open wounds that weren't healing. It healed up in the sunshine.
Yeah, exactly.
The first Nobel Prize for medicine was awarded to a guy that demonstrated you could cure tuberculosis with sunshine. And that's where what we call the sanitariums, that's where they all came from. People that had tuberculosis went and got sunshine.
Yeah. And it's funny on that topic because just not that long ago, I was at a market, and I had my own stall, and, I was pretty much in the sun and I didn't have a hat on or anything. And, a lady came over to me and she was like, you should be wearing a hat. And she almost told me as if I was in trouble. And it just shows how, brainwashed people are into fearing the sun. Like, she almost gave me a hat of hers to put on because she was so scared for me. Yeah. And I was not sunburnt at all, even afterwards. So.
Well, again, this is not medical advice, but you know that you can boil water in a paper cup. But you can make a cup out of paper and you put water in it, and you can actually boil the water in it because the water will not allow the paper to burn.
Oh, right.
In water, for example, as I do, I never wear any suntan lotion. I am as white as any Norwegian man can be, and I never burn while I swim because your skin can't burn while it's wet.
Interesting. That's good to know because, people say that you burn easier at the beach because the water reflects the sunlight.
Well, that's true if you don't cool your skin.
Okay.
But if you're in the water or your water's wet and evaporating, it's cool, you can't burn.
Yeah, right.
In the water, your skin won't burn.
Yeah. Because it's wet, right? Makes sense. Interesting.
And, as I said, I think the other problem is when we talked about the ether and so on, we'll probably haven't done that on air, but you talk about structured water in your body, the importance of sodium chloride and the other various minerals to structure the water in your body. Water is structured if it's going to work, and if it's amorphous, unstructured, it's going to be a problem. And that, I think that describes our whole world. We live in etheric science, not in the kind of crazy science that goes on, that we're all taught.
Yeah.
And the example of that is really just an electric motor or a generator where, in the armature of a generator passes near a magnet that doesn't actually touch it, and yet somehow it can, because of the magnetic field, current is produced and there's drag, which demonstrates, even though there's nothing that you can see, it demonstrates that the ether exists. Everyone relies on the ether existing, but people say the ether doesn't exist, even though everything we experience with electricity and the wonders of the electrical age.
Absolutely, yeah.
All the arithmetic used to calculate how it flows, everything about it is based on the assumption that the ether exists.
Yeah.
So again, it's a kind of a cognitive disconnect between what people really rely on and what they say they believe.
Yeah, and we've definitely, humanity has lost touch with that, and nature is part of that as well. We've very much lost touch with nature. We've lost touch with, I guess, knowing that, there is more, this reality is more about energy than it is science-based and, the supposed atoms and whatnot.
Science was energy-based.
It was, exactly. Yeah, because
up until basically 1900. All the great mathematicians, the Maxwell Clarks, the very the big heavyweights. I think one of them was actually called the Heaviside. All of these people that developed the electrical engineering that we use every day today, it was all based on the assumption that there's an ether, because it's wave theory, and a wave has to have a medium to travel in.
Yeah. I mean, that's completely what Nikola Tesla was doing as well. He completely worked with the ether. I'm not sure
Nikola Tesla existed, because I...
Oh. But I didn't think he was that long ago. I mean, I have the same belief with you of, like, you know, all these supposed Plato and Hippocrates. Even all Hippocrates' works was anonymous, so whether they really existed, you know. But I thought Nikola Tesla was, because there's photos of him, but interesting.
I haven't seen any of I haven't actually seen him write any books or seen any of his theories, whereas the other people that I was talking about, they have published books which you can pick up now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, James Clerk Maxwell's treatise on the electromagnetic theory and Heaviside and all of those guys, they are books that you can get from the library and are still used in modern electrical and transmission theory today.
Okay, yeah. Interesting.
Heaviside, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's, and I don't know if there are any textbooks out there that were written by Nikola Tesla that I've seen anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've just seen the photos and things like that. Supposed quotes, but quotes are always, you know, quotes could be written by anybody.
That's the only thing I'd say about the Tesla. I don't, in my time at university, I didn't have any books by Nikola Tesla thrust at me, so I'm not sure what effect he really had on the development of the theory, modern electrical theory.
Yeah, besides, I do know his work was completely suppressed. But yeah, I did have one. So I did want to ask about salt, because some people do ask me some questions. So I wanted to get your answer as well. For example, one being, can we just get enough sodium and chloride from the food instead of eating extra salt in our diet?
Yeah, so generally speaking, food doesn't have any salt in it. So meat obviously has some sodium in it, but it'd be unlike some salt in it because it's contained in the fluids. But it really just depends on what percentage of moisture is in the meat and so on, and then you could do the calculation really. If you know there are 8 grams of salt per litre in the fluid of any flesh, any meat, you would know how much salt you're getting. People often quote celery as a source of salt, mm-hmm. but you would have to eat, like 100 kilos a day to get what you really need, which I think is about 15 grams a day. And I'm not sure that you'd be able to digest that amount of roughage anyway. There's a lot of fibre and all sorts of things in that to do that. But essentially the only practical source of sodium chloride is salt.
Salt, yeah. Instead of just being from food.
Yeah. And the importance of salt is underlined by history. There are still people trading salt along long-established salt routes in South America. They're from the salt lakes of South America. They have llama trains still taking salt blocks out of there. It's still incredibly important. And it's intriguing to me that there is a lake of salt at the highest parts of the Andes Mountains in South America. Because without that being there, those people would not be able to live.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those little things that make me think God exists. He has obviously said, okay, when I make the world high up in the Andes, I better give these guys some salt. And it all amazes me. People have got access to salt. It's interesting that Japan has got no ability to make salt.
I didn't know that, though.
So they invented these incredible machines that they're starting to shut down now. But Japan's technology of producing salt from seawater is on another level above everyone else's technology.
Wow. Okay, so they make their own instead of just getting it imported.
Well, so in fact, Japan set up the large-scale solar salt industries of Australia and Mexico, largely to provide salt for its huge, what they call chloralkali industry. It's probably not so big anymore, but, in the 60s and 70s, Japan was producing enormous numbers of chloralkali because salt's used as the basis for all modern industry. Paints, glass, everything comes from salt. You can't make glass without salt. You can't make paint without salt. You can't make vinyl chloride plastics without salt. It is the basis of all bleaches, caustic soda. The company Unilever actually started as Lever and Kitchen in Liverpool, where I was born, and they were a salt business that made the first bleaches and stuff, and then have turned, as you know, Unilever is now the giant of modern chemical shampoos and so on.
Wow.
So salt used in food is a tiny fraction of the salt that's used in the world. There is something like 600 million tons of salt produced, mostly for industry, with just a fraction of that used for food.
Okay, yeah, very abundant. Right, okay, so that answers that. Thank you. And then another question that I had was, is there a concern about the potassium to sodium ratio in salt?
Well, effectively, potassium comes from your food. Food is rich in potassium. Green vegetables, cabbages and so on, are a great form of potassium. Potatoes, of course, although understanding the GAP-type potatoes are not popular.
Mm-hmm.
Potassium is sourced from your food, and to get it out, you need to digest that food properly, and that's why you need salt.
Salt, yeah.
So when you salt your food, if you have 15 grams a day of salt with your food, I'm guessing you'll get the same level of potassium. I've never actually found out what the number is, but simply I can only say that I've never heard of anyone have to supplement their diet with potassium.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just good to answer that question for some people listening. And also there's many types of salt out there. So do you want to just confirm about the difference between the right type of salt and then iodized or table salt?
Well, first of all, I think I should say that some people call different compounds salt. So technically, salt can mean all sorts of ionic compounds, right? But we are talking about, if we're talking about table salt now, which is largely sodium chloride. So as far as I'm concerned, if you are not having salt, any table salt is better than no table salt.
Okay.
Right? So even the what you might consider to be the worst one, it might be a chemically produced salt from some massively industrialized process loaded up with anti-caking stuff, is still better than not having any salt. 100%.
Wow, interesting.
However, obviously, because people are very salt conscious, they're looking for salt that has the least amount of deleterious things in it. So salt that doesn't have anti-caking agent is always better than salt that does. And most table salt from Europe comes from what's called the vacuum-assisted crystallization process, called pan-dried vacuum salt. That salt, to produce it, they remove any calcium and magnesium from the product, and there's a trace of what's called Glauber salt, a slightly toxic substance in it. So European people take their table salt, and that has to have an anti-caking. So practically all table salt in England, Europe, and the USA will be produced that way. So I would say not a fan of that. Practically all salt made in Australia is solar evaporated salt. And in my opinion, products like Saxa salt and so on are great products, but they have two disadvantages. One is they often have to have the anti-cake in it. So when you buy the fine salt, it's got either an aluminium-based powder or alternatively a product called sodium ferrocyanide. Sodium ferrocyanide, which is considered to be generally safe under the small doses that are used in the salt. Again, I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
So that's why probably the best products in Australia, the bags of rock salt you can buy?
Yes,
They're great products. That's a sea salt.
Okay.
And you can put that through in a grinder. The other problem with the solar evaporated salt is it always has a little bit of dirt associated with it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So you'll find that if you take a packet of Saxa salt and dissolve it, you'll find little bits of insolubles at the bottom.
Yeah. Is that a problem?
No, it's not. It's usually that product has been used in Australia since the 1860s. I think Australians are very lucky to have, and it's not just Saxa product. There are other Australian salts that have that same property.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're very fortunate to have solar evaporated sea salt as our main.
And that's the traditional way of doing it, I would assume.
In Australia.
Okay. Yeah.
In Australia, but not like I said, Australia is very unusual to have its table salt come from solar evaporation. Then the very fancy salts are things like fleur de sel that comes out of France, or there's some Italian flaky salt. It's hugely expensive that they charge. It's hand raked out of the salt field and all that sort of stuff. And that's very popular. But the salt that I manufacture is called a flake salt, where we take solar evaporated sea salt and we dissolve it in seawater and water, and we filter that. So we end up getting all the properties of sea salt, but without any of the dirt.
Okay.
The insolubles in it.
Yeah, yeah.
And that product is becoming very popular. So flake salts like salted, moulded salt, and so on are becoming very popular. And then another product that's become very popular in Australia is the Murray River salt, which is got a pink hue in it.
Yeah.
That's not sea salt. That's made from brine brought up from underground.
Okay, yeah. And because table salt is refined, whereas flake salt is unrefined, and in the refining process, the trace minerals are lost, and then...
Well, in Australia, as I said, the trace minerals in the solar evaporated salt are not really lost.
Okay, even though it's like fine grain.
It's fine grained, it's crushed, and when they crush it, the granules of sea salt, to stop it caking, they add an anti-cake.
Yeah.
That's the only disadvantage of that, which is why the Saxa sea crystals are quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
They're a great product.
Okay. Oh, yeah, so the table salt in Australia, that's not a problem then?
Except for in my opinion, the anti-cake. I'm not a fan of the anti-cake.
Yeah.
Which is the stuff that stops it. So the fine grain often has, you'll see on the packet, it'll mention that there's got an anti-caking agent.
Yes.
But still, if you're not having any salt, the strained salt, with or without anti-cake, is way better than not having it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's a for sure. But yeah, that's really the advantage of flaky salt is it doesn't need to have an anti-cake in it.
Yeah, because the pouring, the anti-caking agents still allow it to pour better.
That's right.
Yeah.
In the USA, they have there's a product called Morton salt. That when they first put the anti-cake agent in it, whenever it was 100 years ago, their motto was, when it rains, it pours.
I've heard that saying, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's actually a salt. That expression comes from this Morton salt's very famous advertising campaign about its salt at the time. When it rains, it pours.
Yeah. Okay, so for some people that live overseas, and they're just trying to look for a good quality salt, would you say it's best to find a high mineral, unrefined sea salt, or what would you suggest?
I would say that the best salt is sea salt of some kind, preferably without anti-cake. And it's I know in the USA there's people in Canada. There's a whole bunch of people that are doing it, a kind of boutique style like we are. I think Malden Salt's the most famous of the flaky salts around, which is a great product. The product we make, we try and emulate that. And the other, I would definitely go for, Malden style salts, and there are many. There are several people that produce it. Fleur de sel, or if you can get sea salt crystals, like you can buy in Australia. The other problem with the sea salt crystals, you've got to have a grinder and grind it up.
Yeah.
The advantage of the crystals is that they dissolve very quickly. They're great on absorbing blood. They're the original kosher salt.
Okay.
So we produce a style which is kosher style, but we don't try and get it accredited or anything.
Yeah.
Because it's also a religious observance. But that style of flakiness is very, it presents itself to the taste buds very sweetly. That's all. That's the reason why it's becoming so popular.
Yeah. And it is quite nice. Great. And
before I would like to talk about iodine. You just talked about iodine before.
I did say iodized salt. Yeah, go for it.
So iodized salt is simply salt that has had iodine in it. Now, when I was the marketing manager for Cheatham, I was always objecting to the name iodized salt because it sounded like it'd been electrified or had some crazy thing happen to it.
Yeah.
It just sounds like something weird's happened to it, but it's really just salt with iodine added to it. Lack of iodine is a very serious problem in Australia and in a lot of the Western world now. Again, I'm referring to people in Japan. They have about 2,000 to 3,000 micrograms of iodine per day because their diet is, my nose is a little bit blocked. Can I just be excused for 1 second?
Yeah.
Just sort that out.
Yep, go for it.
But in Australia, we're lucky to have 150 micrograms. So we're really travelling at 1/20th of the rate the Japanese have. Now, iodine is extraordinarily important for thyroid function, and lack of low iodine levels results in cretinism, terrible problems with goiter.
Yeah.
A very, very serious problem. Now, the reason that it was never a problem in Australia is that the udders of cows used to be treated with iodine solution for hygiene reasons.
Yeah.
And about 30 years ago, they stopped doing that and replaced it with a chlorine-based solution for treating or cleaning, for hygiene of cows' udders.
Yeah, of course they use chlorine.
So people in Australia are really now starting to suffer, and goiter cretinism is growing. And really, the biggest problem is it's for women and men. You get this water bottle under your chin from it, and I was suffering from that quite badly until I started adding Lugol solution, 3 drops a day, to get me up to the equivalent of Japanese iodine levels. Basically, I take 3 drops. I get to about 2,000 micrograms a day.
Yeah.
Of iodine equivalent. Now that completely shrunk my neck back to what I consider a normal size compared to most men of my height and weight have a great big water bottle.
Mm-hmm.
There's Alan Brough, the comedian, has the most famous example of that thing I'm talking about. So The reason iodine was, and this was always known to be a problem in the English-speaking world, and salt was chosen because everyone was having salt. Salt was chosen as the carrier for iodine addition into the diet. Now, that practice continues. However, the problem remains that because people are cutting down their salt, they're simply not getting enough iodine. And because the iodine is not in the milk anymore, it's a problem.
Yeah, iodine deficiency is like a really big problem now.
It is a terrible problem. And again, especially when you compare to the levels of the Japanese take, and if you have a look at them, they're very terrific people as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So salt was used as a kind of carrier, but it's the level of addition and the amount of salt consumed, it's totally inadequate. So, I do recommend iodine addition supplementation. When I say recommend, I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
I'm crazy. I can suggest to you that if you want to emulate the Japanese intake of iodine, you should supplement with iodine, Lugol solution, I would suggest.
Yeah.
And I get the one which is, I think, about 15%.
Oh, okay. Yeah. They have the highest, concentration of iodine.
Yeah.
They've got the highest one. So that's why it's a great option.
Yeah. So, and because of my time in this, as in the marketing role with Australia's largest salt company, I came into contact with a lot of there's several guys that are very knowledgeable in the field of iodine addition, but most particular, a fellow whose name escapes me, a professor out of South Australia. He may no longer be with us. They cannot stress enough the problem of inadequate iodine. It is causing a problem in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Because, like you said, you need it for thyroid function, which is so important. And there's the amount of people now that have thyroid issues. There's a lot. And
I'm reading more and more every day now.
Yeah.
Thyroxine.
Yeah. And you also need, enough iodine in your body to detoxify properly.
Well, that's the other thing that's going on. So one of the great things about having a lot more salt in your diet is that it will expel fluoride.
There you go. Interesting. Yeah.
And again, I could send you a paper a very amusing paper on a study in rats that complained that the high salt levels these rats were having was expelling the fluoride. So we better make sure that if we want to have people to take up more fluoride in their bodies, that we should encourage them to have less salt.
Mm.
Diabolical, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just diabolical.
Wow.
This is from the 30s.
Oh gosh.
When you read this paper, you'll the other issue is that iodine competes with bromine, and a lot of bromine causes problems with almost plasticizing your skin and your flesh. And a lot of cleaning products are now using bromine. So there's all sorts of
so we're exposed to it a lot.
Bromine is able to toxify the body, and iodine will push bromine out. Bromine competes with iodine to operate in your thyroid and exacerbates that problem of low iodine intake.
Oh, yeah. And so it's lowering the bromine would just be from like increasing iodine in a way.
Iodine will push the bromine out.
Yeah.
And when you get to the sort of levels of salt, if you get to 15 grams of salt a day, you'll produce, in fact, to produce 3 litres of hydrochloric acid, of gastric fluid with a pH of 1, that's 17 grams of salt a day, it turns out.
Yeah.
And that was the average consumption in the world prior to the introduction of refrigeration. It's also the amount of salt recommended by the Israeli defence forces.
Yeah. And wasn't it in World War II, the soldiers were also rationed 16
100%.
grams of salt a day? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about that. 15 to 17 grams is the magic number for an active man.
Yeah.
Probably. So, men, at that time were probably might have been 75 kilos max. So someone like me who's, well over 100 kilos.
So as in the salt intake varies by weight?
Yes, because really we're talking about the amount of fluid you've got in your body. So you really just need to think of it. What you want to do is be as hydrated as possible, because the problem with dehydration is that I keep forgetting the name of it. What's the stuff that stops your bones rubbing on itself?
Cartilage.
When you're dehydrated, your cartilage becomes brittle, and that's why people are getting, as they get older, they have problems with their joints because the cartilage is dehydrated and breaking down.
Yeah.
The same thing's happening in their backs. Because the fluid is shrinking, then the discs become brittle and water comes out of them, and so they end up with back problems.
Yep, hydration is so important. We need hydration for longevity. we need it.
Fantastic book on it just basically says it's all about water, and you've already said that. It's all about plenty of structured water in your body. How do you do that? And that happens, basically through an alchemical process in your body, but you need the raw ingredients in there to do all that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Whatever I say, no one can argue the fact that your body is going to do everything it can to maintain the sodium level at 140 millimoles. And it gets to desperate measures to do that. So the less salt you put into your body, the more desperate your body is going to become to sort it out, and you'll end up all whacked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And salt is so cheap.
Yeah, I think people would go for it if they knew the information that you're talking about right now, instead of what their doctors are telling them.
I'll just repeat those simple messages. We know that you use salt to create hydrochloric acid to digest your food, and the bicarbonate to keep your body alkaline. Everyone knows that you've got to keep your body alkaline.
Yeah.
We know that the sodium is stored in bones. So if you don't have enough salt, you'll deplete your bones. You'll mess yourself up with your bones. We know that chloride is how you breathe, through the chloride shift. Yeah. And we know that your body maintains the sodium level at a very particular concentration, and the pH of your body at a particular thing. And anything that you have in excess of what your body needs, it will simply excrete through the kidneys. So the most salt abstemious person is still going to have the same concentration of sodium in their blood as I am. But they'll look, dehydrated and depending on their diet, I guess. And the other problem is that with the wrong diet, the fluids get stored external to the cells. You end up with water in all the wrong places. You end up getting edema. You see people with swollen ankles.
Yeah.
They're out of balance, so they've got water.
Yeah. Okay.
Water's not in the right places. So there's all sorts of madness that goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, so there you go. You need salt for hydration. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for, I guess, 20 years now, and I'm more or less close enough to 65. I've got no joint problems. Up until the shutdown for that nonsense reason, I was playing badminton with the Australia's #1 badminton doubles player. So and keeping up at a good level.
Yeah.
And I'm still
That's great.
have no joint or knee problems, and I don't wear glasses. So that's the other thing. Your blood is thinner when you have more. If you've got more fluid in your blood, more water in your blood's going to be thinner. So it's going to be able to travel through the fine capillaries more easily, and therefore you'll retain your, the very fine senses, your touch, your eyesight, your smell, your hearing won't deteriorate because they're getting the oxygen flow they need to be maintained.
Yeah.
If you cut down, if you've got thick blood, because if you measure the hypocrite of your blood, it gets thicker and thicker the less salt you have. And the reason your blood pressure rises when you have salt is because your body says, oh, I've got more salt, I can create more fluid. So it does that, it creates more blood, and there's a temporary increase in your blood pressure when you take salt, if you're what they call salt sensitive.
Yeah.
But it passes quickly.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so you can drink, instead of just putting salt on your food, you can also, it's great to drink it in water, and then you're getting
a saline drip.
Yeah, basically. And you're taking in like plasma because it's fluid with the electrolytes in it.
Look, as I said, I think salt's great, but I think seawater's the ultimate.
Okay. Yep. You can try that out too. Go to your local beach. Do you live near a beach then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I windsurf and do all that stuff.
Oh, that's nice. I love the beach, but I'm like right next to, I'm close to the city. Not right next to it, but close. Yeah. That's great. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And
this was great.
I really appreciate you getting in touch.
Yeah, no,
if there's any interest from your people and you want to talk again, I'd be delighted.
Yes, absolutely. And if anybody wants to contact you, how do they go about that?
Probably the simplest is frank@fakeologist.com.
There we go.
And the fakeologist is spelled fakeologist.
Yep, that's straightforward. All right, and I'll just write it in the description as well.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested on the wackier side of my thinking, I have a website called howtotakecareofyourpenis.com.
It's actually a good website. It's got lots of information. You can read his salt articles.
It's just got my views about how I think the world works.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of great information from you. But thank you. This was fantastic. Really appreciate you coming on, Frank.
And I appreciate the opportunity, Emily.
Thank you.